So for this session, we have the McGuire from UW with an extraordinary observation of silver bat migration.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask for a quick bit of forgiveness here at first. We're at the Ontario Bat Network meeting, and I'm going to tell you a story that does not take place in Ontario, but it's such a cool story that I think everybody's going to be on board and get away with it anyway. So one of the things that I think is really neat about working on bats in Ontario is we've got 8 species of bats, and 7 of those 8 species are migratory species. We've got sort of the 2 general categories of migration. We've got things like our little brown bats that are doing more of a regional migration into the hibernaculum back out again. And then we've got our hoary, red, and silver-haired bats that are making more of these latitudinal migrations, generally north to south, generally longer distances with all kinds of caveats about variability and whatnot in there. With the ability to mark animals and go into some of these hibernaculum surveys, we know a little bit about what's going on with the regional migration relative to the latitudinal migrants, where we know very little about these long-distance, more latitudinal migratory movements. So, when you start trying to figure out, we have very little idea what's going on here, so one of the best places to start working into this is to dig into the literature, and you go way back in the literature, and there's all kinds of really neat stories in some of the historical literature, some of these natural history observations. So here's a paper from Howell in 1908, and number 1, best opening line ever for setting up my talk. Very little seems to be known about the migrations of bats, right? So right away, we're setting the stage here. But carries on. The observation which I have to record is so unusual in several respects that an account of it is presented in the hope that observations of a similar nature by others may be brought to light, which is why we're here right now. So, September 28, 1907, Howell's hanging out in Washington, D.C., and looks up during the day and sees a stream of bats flying over. Right? Not big clusters, just here's a bat, there goes another bat, there's another bat. A steady stream of these bats flying over for a couple of hours, counted well over 100 bats. Optics back in the day were not quite as good as they are now. They didn't have Vortex optics. Thank you, Vortex, for sponsoring. But I figured these were most likely either red or silver-haired bats that were migrating consistently south for a couple of hours flying overhead, right? And this was weird. And I asked around and talked to a whole bunch of other prominent naturalists of the day, and I said, anybody else ever seen anything like this? No, nobody else has ever seen anything like this. This is a weird thing. Keep digging in the literature, though, and there's actually a few of these kind of observations come out. So from 1898, we're recording great flights of red bats, and 1921 flocks of 100 or more red and silver-haired bats, 200 red bats in the 50s, hundreds of red bats in the 70s. So this gets me wondering, is this just something that doesn't happen anymore? Did this maybe not actually happen? Maybe they weren't really quite looking at what we think they were looking at. Is this actually a thing that these migratory bats do, used to do, still do? What's going on with all of this, right? So, fast forward to 2004, and Beatrice is down at Long Point, right there. She's down here, and she's happily measuring all of the trees, right? I think it was 478 trees you measured in the end. So she's just measuring trees, measuring trees, measuring trees. And working at the bird observatory, there's lots of other people there doing neat research at the time, and word comes through the bird pipeline. If anybody's a bird, there's all the Discord channels and everything else, and everybody's sharing stories. Word comes through the birding pipeline that there's a Discord post from somebody down over here on the south end of Lake Michigan finding this observation of a whole lot of migrating silver-haired bats. So Beatrice mentions this to me. I said, go find that person, go talk to them. And that's the story that we're going to tell you. So we're going down to the south end of Lake Michigan over here to tell this story. So September 1st, 2024, environmental consultant Woody is his name. Woody was out in the Marquette Park down here, right? This nice little natural area on the south end of the lake. And he's doing a bird survey. Right, so this is a professional who's going out doing a survey, knows what he's looking at, has all the right tools, knows how to read observations, record all the details, all this kind of stuff. So when he's out there at 5:45 in the morning as the sun comes up, and he's out there until a little after 9 o'clock. And what he sees is a stream of silver-haired bats. And he's got his camera, and he gets some really great photos here, right? So over a little over 3.5 hour period of time, he counted over 415 silver-haired bats, all flying west over the lake, just streaming past, not big clusters, just there's a bat, there's 2 bats, there's another bat, there's 3 bats, just this stream of bats for hours flying west over the lake. So of course the suspicion here is that there was some sort of a weather event, maybe there was a shift in the winds or something like that, and these bats got blown out over the lake, they got nowhere to land, And so they're trying to make their way to somewhere that they can get to a safe place to roost for the day. Woody noted a couple of individual bats that looked like they were trying to fight the wind and trying to fly south towards shore, but for the most part, it looked like they were all just kind of going with the wind, which makes a lot of sense to me. If these bats have been blown out over, the sun comes up, they're exhausted, they've been flying for who knows how long. Just go with the easy flow of the wind and find a safe place to roost. You want to do that quick because this is not a safe place to be. These bats weren't foraging, right? So there was not like there was some massive emergence of insects they were taking advantage of, but they were being foraged upon. So I went and pulled up some of the eBird reports from this park that day, and there were observations of 1,000 ring-billed gulls. So Woody actually saw gulls picking off them, these bats, as they're streaming past. There was a peregrine falcon that was having a nice bat breakfast as these bats were all flying past. So right, this is not a great place to be if you're a bat, but they're just streaming past, right? So that alone would be an awesome and amazing observation of bat migration. But the story gets better because Woody's down here. You follow the shoreline just along, all of this down here is all really heavily industrialized, right? It's all concrete and mills, and it's not a great place to be if you're a bat. But if you keep following the shoreline along, you get to park number 566. This is the first sort of green space to the west of where Woody made his observation. And there's a birder named Dan Laurie, and Dan has decided that Park 566 is his local patch. And over the past 6 years, he has birded and put in eBird checklists, almost 1,500 checklists at this park over the past 6 years. So he knows this park. And he was out that morning, the same morning that Woody made his observation, and he found bats. Right? He's out walking his trail, and he looks up and he sees these silver-haired bats roosting on the tree. So we just played a game of find the bat. So let's play a game of find the bat. Let's pretend that we're Dan, right? Can anybody find the bat? All right, let's do another one. Actually, I'm going to give you two at once. I'm going to give you the double-winged challenge. Can you find the bats? Right? So I don't know what Beatrice is complaining about. This seems like it's actually pretty straightforward. But over and over again, there's these individual bats, there's clusters of bats, bats. In his morning of birding there, Dan found 102 silver-haired bats roosting. He got photos of all kinds of them. He even took notes of where he was finding them, which trees they were in, this kind of thing, right? So it seems pretty clear that these bats probably got blown out over the lake. The stream of hundreds and hundreds of these silver-haired bats just kept going along until they could find some place to roost for the day. This is the park, right? So the lake shore over here, this is all, it looks a bit odd because this is an old steel mill site that's been restored, right? They've been working on reclaiming it as a bit of a natural space. Woody's route Dan's route takes them all through here as he's birding along, looking for all kinds of things. There's trees all over, but every one of the bats that he found was in this strip of trees right on the edge of the shoreline, which speaks of desperation, right? These bats just, the first tree that they find, that's where they're going, that's where they're going to stay. So that would be a pretty amazing observation to add to what Woody had seen. But it gets better, because Dan keeps going back, right? This is his spot, he keeps going. And 3 weeks later, there's another fallout. Right? In this case, September 21st, he found 46 more silver-haired bats. Right? Again, he's got them, they're on trees, they're roosting around. A couple look quite desperate, they're even on the reeds, there's some just up in the leaves, but again, all the photos have got all the photos. So we got lots of bats going on here, and this is sort of this really amazing fallout observation. So what does it all mean? Obviously, the influence of weather is something that's going to be important for thinking about these migrating bats. The paper came out just a couple years ago. A whole bunch of red bats washed up dead on the shore of Lake Michigan, and the thought is they probably got blown out in the storm and then drowned. The fact that the only way we can make these observations is the bats are flying during the day. What's happening at night? Presumably these kind of things are happening at night. We're just not seeing them because we aren't having people out there to look for them. The bats came through on September 1st and again on September 21st. There's nothing in between. So how frequent are these events? Woody's been going there for 6 years, and he's seen one bat once and two bats once. Right? So it's not like this thing happens every year, happens all the time. This seems to be a pretty rare event, but it happened a couple of times within a single season. I talked about the desperation aspect of roost selection. So Beatrice had some aspects of roost selection. In this case, I don't think there's much, just good enough to stop for the day, be safe. The importance of natural habitat, that whole industrialized shoreline and finding a park, and thinking about the restored quality of these sites and things we can do for that. All kinds of questions about sociality. Every one of Beatrice's bats was by itself, but we've got clusters of bats here. Are they actually social during migration or not? Is this a fallout kind of effect? And then just kind of closing on this idea of the value of natural history observations, and people being out and seeing things and sharing that information, and then we can combine this all and actually really learn some important things about what's going on, especially with the advent of some of these digital communication channels. I wasn't originally a big fan of Discord, but it seems like it's worthwhile to follow along. So, close with going back to how, right? Observation is so unusual that we gotta tell the story, which is exactly what we've done here with another observation. But I think this observation just actually reinforces even more so that very little seems to be known about the migration paths. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much to Dan and Lee for taking such great notes and sharing all the information with Beatrice, and thanks to everybody for joining us. So we'll certainly, Woody was just, he was there on a contract, so we probably isn't going to be there regularly, but Dan, that's his part. So we will definitely get in contact with Dan and see if he has any other future observations of this kind of thing. We're working on writing this up right now, so we're going to get this published so that's out there, and hopefully I'll get more people looking at and watching for these kind of things and see what Dan finds in future years.
Did you look at all if there was any data collected about like what the wind were or like any weather that was going on those general dates?
Yeah, so the question is, have we looked at the weather yet? I'm pulling that data now. We haven't actually got it yet, but almost surely there's got to be some sort of sudden change in wind direction or some sort of storm system somewhere else that blew out. I can't imagine that that's voluntarily ended up out there. So we will have that data. I just don't have it yet. There.
So, as you mentioned, they seem to all be heading west against the prevailing wind, right? Prevailing winds are generally from the west going east. Do you have any thoughts on why bats want to go west and not east towards the Atlantic where it's warmer?
So in this, the question is if the prevailing winds are generally from the west, why would the bats be seemingly going against the wind, and why would they not just go with the wind? I think on this particular day, they were going with the wind. That was the east wind that they got caught up in, is my suspicion. We're going to pull that data. So my guess is they're not intentionally going west, they're just kind of, they're exhausted, they're going with the tailwind, they're just going to make it easy for them to get as land as possible. So I don't know what this would look like in a non-storm event. Yeah.
There's a question that I was wondering if you looked at models of prediction, pathways, and like where, like we're thinking might be going or like.
Yeah, so the question is how does this maybe relate to other general migration pathways in this line obviously well? I think this individual observation probably doesn't help us too much with that, other than there are clusters of bats that are very along the shores of the Great Lakes, which there's some other observations from Chicago, red bats and things like that. Part of the other project, so they just mentioned that we're tagging all the bats and we're working on bonus tags. So this is part of the long term. We're really doing bats every year for a whole bunch of years to build up a big data set so we can actually start to see what's going on larger scale. Right now, there's a lot of individual variation, but with enough animals, we might start to see some general patterns. Stay tuned. Yes.
Thinking about this, the implications of this forestry industry. Because it's stuff for, in forestry, for example, the industry getting one of the big trees, definitely not come. But also in the industry, commits to designate patches on the land close to the shore. And in actuality, even if relatively small, maybe not really on.
Yeah, for sure. So the comment there is about the importance of having these patches and working with industry, and perhaps just emphasizing the importance of having small patches along the shore, even on the property of some of these industrial. I think that's an excellent point as we think about managing habitat rather than managing the habitat of an individual site. If you think about just along that shoreline where there's so much industrial development, if we can think of patches of refuges almost along the way where these kind of events are going to happen, maybe this time we move to this particular park, or next time they might be another park and somewhere else, if we can have patches that can hopscotch along, that would make a lot of sense.
Did anyone actually go out and check the anthropogenic areas? Like, those really tall buildings, harder to see, like, not, like, having these two records both be in parks doesn't necessarily mean they're absent from the buildings.
Yeah, so Polly makes an excellent point that we've got the observation bats in one park, we've got the observation bats in the other park. That does not necessarily imply that they would be found somewhere in between. We don't know of anyone at this point who would have been checking those kinds of places. One of the things that we have, so not separate from this observation, but as a general thing, I have some data. There's actually just a connection we made in an OBN 2 years ago. We had the folks from FLAP they're doing all the surveys of the windows in downtown Toronto. And they do occasionally see some bats, not often, not many, but they've actually shared that data with the commission the report to. So I think there are some. It wouldn't surprise me if there were some. I would be very surprised if there were huge numbers of bats in those industrial areas, but you're absolutely right. You're trying to be able to see it. So the question is how many years have they been going to this park? It won't be that many because it's a relatively new park. They just been newly restored. I think I went back 6 years of eBird records and there was 1,400 checklists, something like that. So he's been going regularly during migration periods for at least 6 years. Yeah. But I don't think the park really existed in this. It's a fairly recent park. Remember we did 2017 in the restoration, so yeah. That's just off from the overhead. It's still pretty sparse. It's growing back here. It's not a full-on forest park. Great. Thank you very much.